genitally mutilate women and throw gays off the roof of buildings, and who also want to blow up the World Trade Centers. But those are actually two discrete groups of Muslims, right? And oftentimes it's illiberal conservative Muslims who oppose terrorism.
Yeah.
Well, Al-Qaeda and ISIS were opposed to each other.
Well, there's that. So they're jihadis who hate one another because they're kind of rival gangs. But there are conservative Muslims who can honestly say that ISIS and Al-Qaeda do not represent their faith at all, and they hate them and they wish they would go away. But when you talk to them about gay rights or what you should do if your daughter marries a man you don't approve of, you get crazily conservative theocratic views that are totally hostile to the values of the West. And so it's paradoxically and somewhat inconveniently, some of your allies in the Muslim community against jihadism, against terrorism, against ISIS and Al-Qaeda are people who think the penalty for homosexuality should be death, right? Or
by rocks.
Yeah, so
and the reason I raise that, Joe, is because I think that we do a bad job in this country of having a conversation of where we split apart our two big concerns about Islam, which I think is, on the one hand, are we going to have very conservative, illiberal people coming in who undermine the sort of broadly progressive values that we regard as being the basis of Western civilization, like equal rights for women, equal rights for gays, all that sort of stuff. Free speech. And then we also, at the same time, talk about, are they going to pose a security threat? And what I think is interesting is to be careful about noticing that those are actually two different groups of people. The people who are going to blow up, who are going to do San Bernardino are probably not actually that devout. And the people who pose a threat potentially to, I don't know, when you look at the New Year's Eve rape problem in Cologne or something, and people are like, oh my God, how can Germany possibly assimilate 1 million Syrian refugees? Those problems are less problems of terrorism, presumably, and more problems of, like, what the fuck happens to women? Yeah, exactly, culture. What the fuck happens to our young women if they don't feel as empowered because they're being brought up in a cultural soup that's somewhat more misogynistic than it would otherwise be?
Yeah, and I think we can't deny the other problems with different ideologies. Like when someone shoots an abortion clinic because they're pro-life and they shoot up these doctors and murder them, that is most likely based on a Christian faith. And it's rarer, but it's still a problematic situation where you got like someone's ideology, it gives them the right to murder. And whether it's over people being gay or whether it's over people giving abortions, whatever it is that they decide that their ideology is correct and you're out there doing a sin, and even though X amount of society accepts this as being like in our country where we have certain laws when it comes to abortion rights, they can choose to decide that God's law is more important and kill people. And that's an ideology issue. And that's the same thing that you're facing with Islam, and it could be the same thing with some new religion if it came along and was more radical and more crazy. It's entirely possible because ideologies have followers. And if someone is charismatic and they have a compelling ideology, it could start off as nationalism and work its way towards something that resembles some sort of a religion, but ultimately it's a person with a very rigid set of ideas that can't be questioned and forcing these ideas on other people and controlling behavior. And when it involves violence, it becomes really problematic. And when people deny that it's really problematic because they're worried about being misconstrued as being insensitive, then we have a real impasse. We have a real problem.
I mean, there are Sammy. You're often caricatured as believing that all of the problems of Islam are intrinsic to the faith itself, and that there's nothing culturally or historically contingent about the problem that in Islam at the moment. I know that that's not true. I know that you're the first to accept that. Yes, the fact that we love oil has something to do with it. The fact that we've propped up dictators has something to do with it. The history of the 20th century has something to do with it. But do you think that there are any stresses that could be put on other religions that would yield the same dysfunction that we now see in Islam? In other words, is it...
Well, it might yield the same dysfunction, but you couldn't link the dysfunction in a plausible way to the doctrine, and that's a big difference. So
does that matter?
It matters, yeah, because, so for instance, you have Buddhists in Burma who are killing Rohingya Muslims, and that is clearly an example of tribal religious violence. But there's nothing in the teachings of Buddhism that justifies that violence. And that is, it would be a lot worse if the Buddha had given a sermon about how anyone who kills a Muslim is going to go straight to the highest heaven, right? That would be worse. And if you could always point to that sermon until the end of the world as a justification for killing Muslims as a Buddhist, it would be very difficult to undermine that kind of tribal violence. And so it is an anomaly among Buddhists to be killing anyone, really, because Buddhism, I mean, what's not surprising is that you have like the Tibetan Buddhists who have been victimized horrendously by the Chinese, and they're not practicing suicide bombing. They're practicing self-immolation. They're killing themselves as a statement of protest. And given the teachings of Tibetan Buddhism, that's understandable. Now, I've said this before. Buddhism. There's no strand of Buddhism that is totally pacifist, and you can get Buddhists who will kill people based on if you push them too far. And there's some version of Zen Buddhism that inspired the kamikazes. It wasn't like a straight line from doctrine to flying a plane into a ship, but it definitely there were Zen teachers who were instrumental in this, and it was a somewhat plausible connection to Zen Buddhism, but it would have been very different if that had been a Muslim country with a doctrine of jihad.
But wasn't the kamikazes directly related to methamphetamines as well? I mean, they were directly related to altering their state of consciousness to the point where they're making really shitty decisions.
Not that I'm aware of. There's two books you should read.
If you could find that. I thought that was something that
they could have been drugged, but yeah. There's a book called there's two books, Zen at War and Zen War Stories, written by the same guy. Where
what's his name?
Actually, I don't remember the author's name, but Zen at War is one of the books, and. Yeah, I mean, so Zen. I mean, what's different about Zen Buddhism from Tibetan Buddhism, for instance, is there's less of an emphasis on compassion. There's a much more of a martial ethic, and it's you can there are certain texts within Zen Buddhism that can look like, this is a recipe for kind of total self-sacrifice in a kind of martial way for the greater good. Whereas within Tibetan Buddhism, and again, the Tibetans are not pacifists. You can go back in Tibetan history, you see violence, but Tibetan Buddhism has much more of an emphasis on compassion, and it's not surprising that you've got now something like 150 Tibetan Buddhist monks who have just burned themselves up in public in defiance of the Chinese. You don't have an endless supply of Tibetan Buddhist suicide bombers. There hasn't even been one, and that's based on ideology and the differences in ideology.
Well, did this all start out with the guy who did that for the Vietnam War? That very famous photo that was on the cover of Rage Against the Machine's album.
Well,
was that the first one?
I don't know if that was the first, but
self-immolation.
That was a very famous instance.
One. Have you ever seen that video?
I've seen the cover of the Rage Against the Machine.
The video is insane because the guy doesn't move. He covers himself in gasoline, they light him on fire, and he sits there in the lotus position and just burns.
Well, how do you do that?
There's a lot. God. I mean, there's literally been more than 100 Tibetans.
Last time I was here, you showed me a guy dying from being fucked by a horse. Someone called me from the UK.
This is a very important
There's
show.
an ideology for you.
We have to cover all bases.
It was a different show. It was your show instead of my show.
I deal with stats.
I got a call from.
Happily, there are not many on being fucked by a horse.
I got a call from the UK with a friend of mine who was listening to the podcast, and he puts it through his speakers, and it was in the kitchen in the morning. I don't know why he was listening to it in the morning. His children were there eating breakfast, and they're listening to me watching a video of a man being anally raped fatally by a horse.
Not raped. Give the horse a break. It was not his call.
It was
he didn't want to
consensual.
do it. It was totally consensual. The man, they asked for it. The guy willingly bent over the hay. The other
and
guy
this friend of a mine was just like, okay, I think time to turn off the nice radio.
Well, why the fuck do a little research before you expose your kids to some fucked up shit, dude?
Well, that's right. Who on earth is putting the Joe Rogan experience on in the morning?
Bad parenting.
Google my name.
Yeah. Exactly.
That guy's an asshole.
Know me as well.
I'm just kidding, dude. If you're out there, appreciate you listening.
The other thing about Zen Buddhists is, I mean, it's always different when you're talking about like some kind of imperial regime, like in Japan during the war, because that in itself is a kind of a religion.
It wasn't straight Zen. It was a fusion, but Zen didn't help in that case.
But nor did their reverence for the emperor and their sense of themselves
Jainism,
as ants in a bigger military machine.
Yeah, but my point, and I've made this 1,000 times, but it goes to Joe's point about ideology. The differences between ideologies matter, and it matters that there is an explicit doctrine of jihad in Islam. There isn't in Christianity, and if there were, it would be worse. And there isn't anything like that in Jainism. Jainism is the opposite of Islam in every relevant respect. It's just you cannot justify violence even against insects as a Jain. And so if you see Jains killing people, they're just people killing people, but they cannot justify it based on their doctrine, and that matters.
Yeah. Exactly. It's a bit like when people say that, why aren't we focusing on, well, if a white Christian goes in and shoots up, the Aurora shooting or something like that, then that's an act of Christian terrorism. Well, no, it's not. It's not. He just happens to have been Christian. He was motivated by all kinds of other things. Abortion clinics, yes, abortion clinics is Christian terrorism.
I think that's one of the best.
You wouldn't do it if you were Christian.
I think that's one of the best examples of it.
Except there's been 15 people killed in 30 years.
Yeah.
So there's no
and there are no Christians. There are no Christians in any numbers who would defend that. Even the crazy anti-abortion people who spend all their lives arguing against abortion and are standing out there with the horrific pictures of aborted fetuses, even they will disavow the violence.
That's not necessarily true, because I remember one of the last abortion clinic shootings. One of the really disturbing aspects of it to me was people that were defending this guy, and I remember watching these interviews where there were people who were saying that why don't you label it correctly? What that guy did is stop babies from getting killed by a murderer, and they went through this whole thing.
There are some people who, obviously there's some people who will defend it,
but you're saying no.
No, but I'm just saying there's no group who will say yes. We are advocating the murder of abortionists.
No, I don't think there's any there's no valid parallels. There's no valid comparisons, but it is ideologically based. I mean, and even if it's rare, we see all sorts of. You taking off, Hannibal Buress?
Hannibal's got to get out of here.
Good seeing you, man.
Hannibal,
thanks for being here. Can we get a hug it out? Can we get a hug between Hannibal and Sam?
Hug it out, please.
Get a hug.
But just for the sake of mankind, for love, Hannibal.
Say you get a hug like it's a fucking charity or something.
Okay.
Well, all right. You don't get a fucking hug. Fuck off. Get out of here.
This is a man talking.
I hope we get another chance to make it right.
We made it right. Hey. Hannibal, you're the shit. Thanks for an awesome podcast. Appreciate it, brother.
Thanks for being here,
I know you're drunk, but that's a doorknob. You can turn. There you go. Want to let him out, Jamie? He doesn't know how to get out. He's going to break my window.
Yeah, he's going to smash it and just dive out. Glad he doesn't have
steps you have to take to open that door.
Have a vehicle.
No, he's Ubering it.
Yeah,
that was everybody knows what it was. It was what it was. It's just a bit of a riff.
Well, no, I'm interested to know whether you think I fucked up in that conversation.
I do not think you fucked up. I think that some people aren't willing to go along with your clinical assessment of statistics without invoking emotions and their own personal experiences. And I don't think that's on your side. I don't think it's even on his side. I think maybe he misunderstood. Definitely alcohol was involved, but Hannibal's awesome. He's a great guy. And I just think that these kind of conversations sometimes get heated. And it's like when people start – here's a perfect example that's really a shitty comparison, but similar in a way, where I think people don't know what the fuck they're talking about. I get really upset when someone tells me that their Chinese kung fu instructor knows how to kill somebody with a death touch, and I will I want to go shut the fuck up. No, you don't. Like stop. Well, let me just explain where he taught Tai Chi, Kung Fu. No, and it becomes unreasonable. And I think in his mind there are so many egregious incidences of cops fucking over black guys that this can't even be breached without discussing that beforehand. And from his own personal experience, I kind of get where he's coming from, plus alcohol.
But the difference between the Kung Fu touch thing is that that's a claim that you know to be untrue, whereas Sam wasn't saying anything that was untrue.
Had no idea we were going to have this podcast. So Hannibal was sitting here with me. We're having a podcast about his comedy tour, Hannibal Montanable.
I get it, but Sam and I didn't know we were going to talk about Black Lives Matter either.
No, I know. But
we could just as easily have been talking about transgender people.
We drank a lot. That's what I'm saying. I mean, we were really drunk during that podcast. I was having a hard time keeping it together. And we got out of it. Got out of it, and he kept going. I tailed out of that bitch. I caught the clouds, and I rode a good wave, and I hit the autopilot, and I washed my face, and I refreshed, and I got right back in.
Joe,
he kept drinking.
You're a fucking sweetheart because you always assume the best of everybody, but there are different ways that drunkenness can manifest itself. In you, it manifests itself as greater generosity and greater openness and a desire to be the godmother of the situation and bring these two guys together. In him, it manifested as a knee-jerk response, and essentially anti-intellectual knee-jerk response to what Sam was trying to put forward. Right, so you can't blame the alcohol. The alcohol can take you in whichever way you want.
I mean, if he was drunk and he's actually not following what I'm saying, then I can totally blame the alcohol.
Yeah, you sound like a rape apologist, Josh Zepps. It wasn't the booze.
He fucking deserved it. He fucking deserved it. He shouldn't have been wearing that skirt.
He couldn't consent to the conversation.
Yes, but he could not consent.
But I'm interested. I mean, so do you think I did anything wrong in that conversation?
Not at all.
Okay. And if it occurs, I put this to our listeners. If you think I did anything wrong,
why don't you email Noam Chomsky and ask him?
Exactly. No, I don't think. I think.
Ironically, that's how it would have gone with Noam Chomsky.
Oh, sure.
I think
that's how bad the left has become.
And Salam would say you got dressed down.
That's right. Well, they're going to say that about this.
Probably.
I got destroyed by Hannibal Buress.
I think it's the wrong question to say. I think it's the wrong question to say. Did I do anything wrong? I mean, I think
I think I white mansplained for you.
You did.
You know, like mansplain. Yeah. Man, when someone mansplains, I white mansplained. I tried to I'm like, damn, I got to figure out a way to give this animosity a break. So I try to step in and.
Well, I mean, I have one ethic in this situation, which is, I don't want to say anything now about Hannibal that I wouldn't say with Hannibal sitting here, right? So, and I really try to live by that ethic. And I didn't want to say anything. I didn't want to refrain from saying anything with Hannibal sitting here that I would have said to you guys if he hadn't been here, right? So, and I'm sure I could have done a better job than I did, but it's just we have to get past this paranoid self-censorship on important topics based on an inventory of skin color in the room. And that's...
I mean, the question is, how the fuck do you do that? Which is why I invited you here to have this conversation, and then we somehow accidentally, quite fortuitously...
No, it was beautiful. I mean, it was a beautiful manifestation of the actual issue.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I couldn't have asked for a better real-time case study just by happenstance of precisely the problem that I'm trying to nut out, and that you're trying to nut out, and that Joe's trying to nut out in some way. The question is blowing... So... When you blow through, and let's not talk about this, but just to make an analogy to other things, you are routinely taken out of context by people, and you have to spend long periods of time on your podcast and elsewhere sort of re-clarifying points that I get a sense from you are exhausted to have to re-clarify it all because you feel like you're being gratuitously taken out of context by people who are willfully misrepresenting your position. I don't need to tell you what these quotes are, but for people who don't know them, it's things like you saying that it would be terrifying if the only people who were left speaking any common sense about Islam in Europe were fascists. If it may come to the point at which progressives are just so incoherent on the problem of Islamic jihad that fascists make the most sense. And so certain people will take that sentence, they'll take it out, they'll make it sound like you're supporting European fascism. When you do things like that, when you write that sentence, are you aware that you're blowing through a red light and that you're kicking a hornet's nest, or are you simply thinking to yourself, "This is technically true, ergo, I shall write it"?
Well, I'm more and more aware of it, and I mean, I think naively I have decided that a sentence can be interesting and provocative and justified over the course of subsequent sentences, and therefore you're safe. And I now know that if a sentence on its own is interesting and provocative, I have enough malicious people following me that they'll lift that sentence out of context, deliberately misleading people as to what the context is. And and this is another thing that people are confused about. Anytime the charge that you've taken my remarks out of context is not an empty charge. Now, every time you quote anybody, of course you're taking a quote out of context. The crime is to take a quote out of context in such a way as to be deliberately misleading about what it means in context.
Right. Well, I mean, you're not always taking it out of context. I mean, I think that's why we use the word context. You're taking it out of the
work,
environment.
Yes. You can't quote the entire work, right? Otherwise, you're just handing people books. So, so you have to. If you're going to lift a paragraph out of somebody's book, you're taking that paragraph out of its context, and so I do that for the Quran. I'll take a quote out of context in the Quran.
Well,
it's out of the Quran. It's out of the book. I'll quote the Quran.
Yeah.
But I am never quoting it in a way that is misleading as to the context in which it appears in the Quran, which is what people with some regularity do to me.
Intellectual dishonesty.
Yeah. It's like you know I've written an article bemoaning the influence of fascists in Europe and the fact that liberals are making a space for fascism because they're not speaking honestly about the problem of jihadism. And I'm as worried about the fascist as anyone, and yet you're going to lift a quote that makes it seem like I love fascists, right? That's dishonest, and that gets done rather often. It's just... But if there is no defense against that, otherwise you're going to write so blandly.
Well, that's right.
And defensively.
It'll all just be anodyne pap, wouldn't it?
Everything's going to have a footnote attached to it.
Well, but that's what happened tonight. You need to have. I mean, you can either go through life constantly appending footnotes to everything, which is what I guess most of us do. If we want to say something that is potentially going to be inflammatory, then we add a caveat at the beginning that tries to telegraph to whoever we're speaking to that we are on their side, and that just because we're saying something that sounds a bit like something that someone who you might dislike would say doesn't mean that we actually are that person who you would dislike. And just because I'm saying something that might sound out of context, like I might be expressing sympathy for European fascists, doesn't mean that I actually am expressing sympathy for European fascists. But if that's the kind of dialogue that is required, then we are just descending into a morass of endless pablum, and we are just going to spend so much time tying ourselves up in knots of caveats that it's going to be impossible to actually ever get to the point. And I think that some people have reached fatigue on that, so they just don't go there, and that maybe that's one of the reasons why we just don't talk.
A measure of my fatigue was today. I tweeted out a new kind of poll. If you think my remarks about Islam are bigoted, please unfollow me and block me so I can see how many of you there were. So I was just trying to purge my Twitter feed of all the people who just don't understand what I'm saying about Islam, and nothing happened. Nobody. It's like I don't think I lost more than 15 followers, but I would love to do that. It's like at a certain point, I realize there are people I can't reach, and it's not a matter of having dialogue.
Do you hate follow anybody? Like, do you follow anybody that's preposterous?
I'm not sure. I don't think I do. I mean, I might follow Trump. No, I actually don't follow Trump.
I have hundreds. Yeah. Hundreds of people.
Yeah. No, I mean,
creationists.
People are following
crazy
me
fuckers
for that purpose. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. Like, there's a lot of people like, no, not so fast, buddy. I'm not unfollowing or blocking you. I want to find out what the fuck you're up to.
No, but I thought they might want to show. I thought they might want to make it hurt and just show my Twitter followership go down by tens of thousands. But
I'm curious as how many people are actually paying attention on Twitter. A good 30% of all my replies on Twitter are these artificial girls, these fake.
Oh, I've seen those.
Yeah, they want want to know if I would like to see them naked.
And of course you would. Why not?
Well, what is
it's
that?
A bot.
What is the business model of
That's a good question.
That bot?
I never click on that because I don't know where the fuck it goes.
Like if you followed them back, something good would happen for them. Like I
think they're proposing links, and I think if you click on those links, it's entirely possible that you might get scammed or you might get a virus. Or
I think I've clicked on them occasionally just to see what they are.
Someone's computer's infected. Don't accept emails from Jeff Subs.
I think they're just like
right, Jamie. Jamie just nodded.
Online pharmacies or
Jamie,
something.
Jamie, talk to him. Tell him what the fuck's going on.
I use a Mac.
Online pharmacies that want you to see their pussy. I mean, that's literally what they're saying on half of my thing. Do you want to see my naked vagina?
Yeah, that's just to try to get you in. And then they're like, hey, you want some Viagra?
Up too. It's like, vagina, no. Pussy, no. Keep going. And they eventually get dirtier and dirtier. Like, whoa, all right, what are you up to? Let me see. Let me
sweet lady hole.
Mine all say, do you want to talk about police violence?
What do you think about Islam? Click here. Let me get to it. I want to express myself.
I also wanted to raise with you, since you mentioned that tweet, because I saw that today. Is it possible to be too black or white about what people mean when they talk about
fucking
bigotry?
Black and white again after Hannibal leaves. You go with the black and white. Jesus, bro.
I think that there are people who think that you're... so you said, if you think my criticism of Islam is driven by bigotry, unfollow and block me. Is that an on-off switch? Because some people, and I'm on your side, and I don't think that you're driven at all by bigotry, but again, it strikes me that there could be a spectrum on which... a smart person, a Glenn Greenwald, for example, to name one of your nemeses, could say it's not that you are actively bigoted towards Muslims. It's that you are coming from a worldview of just inherited kind of pro-American white privilege that you've been inculcated with. So you're unaware that your reason is leading you into places that land for other people as being... oblivious to the faults of your own kind, and overly harshly critical of
it's just not true in this case. So for instance, I wrote a blog post. I didn't even write it. It's the only blog post I've ever released where it couldn't have been done but for embedded YouTube videos. It's just a series of YouTube videos and the title is Islam and the Misuses of Ecstasy. And it's where I argue that I'm actually deeply empathetic with the spiritual and aesthetic and ethical aspirations of Muslims, and so I kind of go through in a series of videos the things I find captivating about Islam, right? So I love the call to prayer, right? Given even all that I know about how much I hate the Quran and hate the ideology, I think the call to prayer is absolutely beautiful, right? So I show a call to prayer video. Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan, the Qawwali Sufi singer, is one of my favorite musicians of all time. Right? I love him. I have done, done Sufi practices all night long. Right? Like I know what it's like to be captivated by the energy and aesthetic of that context, and I like the architecture. I like the food. It's like I'm a xenophile generally. I don't want. It's like I don't live in Nebraska and want corn-fed beef and no
there go my
culture.
7 Nebraskan
right?
listeners.
Yeah, I mean it's like I have a deeply cosmopolitan and xenophile relationship to culture, and I just don't want the dangerous, divisive religious bullshit in addition to all of that stuff. And the truth is you don't need any of that to see the virtue of staying up all night chanting with 100 people who are in ecstasy, right? So my book Waking Up was all about trying to figure out how to honor altered states of consciousness and, quote, spiritual experience in the context of a rational conversation about the world. And you can do even very traditional practices like the zikr or any Sufi dancing, right? But you don't have to lie to yourself about the origins of books or about what you know about the nature of the universe. And so it is the claim that I am just completely out of touch with all the goodness at the heart of this tradition is just not true. What I'm in touch with in a way that most people are not is the fact that people really fucking believe in paradise. They really believe that if they die in the right circumstances, they are going to get into an eternity of happiness with the virgins and all the rest. And if they don't believe the right things, they're going to burn in fire for eternity. People really believe this, and most secularists like Glenn Greenwald and most of my liberal, non-believing critics don't think anyone actually believes this stuff, right? They don't. They just don't. They think suicide bombers are either depressed or on drugs or just so desperate in their lives that they would otherwise be suicidal. They don't actually think they're going after martyrdom. And yet, if you pay 5 minutes of attention to this phenomenon, reading what these people write and watching their videos and reading the texts that they're devoting their attention to, you see that they absolutely believe this stuff.
So just coming back to making straw men or steel men of your opponents, the easiest... I mean, those positions are easy to knock down. I mean, anyone who claims that jihadists don't really believe in paradise is an easy target. I mean, I think that most reasonable people can agree that it's clear that ISIS genuinely believes in paradise and that they are motivated by Muslim texts.
It's still I would argue it's still a fringe view in intellectual circles, certainly on the left. If you're talking about
I'll grant you that. Right?
Christian fundamentalists,
numbers,
they would agree.
Certainly among my listeners, I think almost everyone would agree that ISIS is ISIS is a bunch of Muslim terrorists who have gone off the rails, but who genuinely believe the things that they claim to believe.
Right.
But the strongest version of your opponent's argument would be, yes, of course that's true, and of course ISIS wants everyone in the world to believe that its vision of Islam is the true one. And Sam Harris is naively playing into ISIS's hands by sort of accepting ISIS's narrative in that way, and that the vast majority of Muslims want no truck with that, and to believe that the sort of theological basis of Muslim extremists in ISIS, that has any relevant bearing really on your average Muslim who just gets up in the morning and wants to go to work and pray a few times a day and make a living and live in peace. They are so overwhelmingly in the majority that it's a sort of a red herring to even worry about the theology.
Well, they're overwhelmingly in the majority in terms of not being sympathetic with ISIS. But when you look at, I mean, again, you have to just talk about specific cases. I think we're very lucky in the United States in terms of Muslim public opinion. But if you look at Europe, if you look at the UK in particular, and you poll questions like, should the Danish cartoonists have been imprisoned, right? Or should someone be killed for leaving the faith? These are not, the bad answers are not the tiny minority. It's something like 70% thought that the Danish cartoonists should be imprisoned. And it's something like 30-40% think that people should be killed for leaving the faith, and the same number want to live under Sharia law. And these are British Muslims. So it's not, if that was down to 3%, then we could talk about a fringe. Now, I don't know what it is in the U.S. It's not nearly as bad as Western Europe, and I think we have a very different group of Muslims. But the scary thing about the U.S. and the scary thing about, quote, moderate Muslims everywhere is that when you get them talking about the link between specific religious beliefs and the kind of violence and the kind of intolerance and the kind of oppression of women and homosexuals and the resistance to free speech, all of it, all of these highly dysfunctional attitudes and behaviors when you're talking about living in a pluralistic world, moderate Muslims, the people who get on CNN, Reza Aslan and Dean Obadallah and the people who I get pitted against, they systematically lie. Right, they're not, and they
about what specifically?
About the tenets of the faith, about the link between. So Reza Aslan will get on CNN and say, Islam has forbidden slavery. Right, the Quran forbids slavery, and therefore
probably does, doesn't it? And also approves it.
It only forbids it for Muslims. You can't enslave other Muslims. You can enslave everyone else. Right, it's absolutely clear. Right. There's no connection between FGM and Islam. No, there are hadiths that totally support FGM, right? So they lie, right? And this happens too much, and the people are too well educated for it to be they're not just ignorant. Someone like Reza Aslan is a liar. He's not just confused. And then
what's his end goal in this deceptive depiction of the religion?
I think it's as varied as the people involved. With him, I think he's just a pure opportunist who wants to be this famous conciliatory voice of moderate Islam. But the most depressing thing and the scariest thing, frankly, that I've encountered since my collaboration with Maajid Nawaz is to see how demonized he is in the so-called moderate Muslim community. Right,
so, Maajid for being such a vocal opponent of extremism.
Yeah, and just for being willing to honestly talk about the link between ideology and violence.
It's the same with Ayaan Hirsi Ali. I mean, there are a lot of people who
so she is demonized, and so if you are going to demonize Ayaan, given her background and given the fact that she's being hunted every day of her life by theocrats in your own religion, and you're going to demonize Majid, who is like the most reasonable, ethical, liberal voice you're ever going to find, you're not a moderate, right? You're passing as a moderate. You're being called a moderate on CNN, but you are at minimum totally dishonest and playing some other game that is not actually productive in this space. What we need are honest reformers like Majid. We need 100 million Majids who are going to say, listen, there are certain things in our religion that are anachronistic. This is true of every religion. Christianity, if you're going to look at the texts, believes in witches, and they used to kill people they thought were witches, and this is justified in the Bible. It's justified in St. Thomas Aquinas. It's justified in Augustine. And there are people who still do it in Africa in the name of Christianity, but we have outgrown this, and it's a good thing we've outgrown this because witches don't exist, right? You need moderate, quote, moderate Muslims who will make the same move. But what you have are just a bunch of liars.
Well, how do we get them? How do we get the moderate ones?
Well, Majid is the recipe.
Well, yeah, but now there's a tactical. I mean, I've interviewed Richard Dawkins on a number of occasions. I always pose this to him as well about what is the tactical and strategic method to win people over, right? Because I know. On a recent episode of We the People Live, I was talking to a friend of mine, Nagin Farsad. I don't know if you know her. She's one of Dina Badala's colleagues, and they made a film together, I believe. She's an Iranian American Muslim comedian, and she and I lock horns quite a lot for exactly the same reason. I find it infuriating to encounter the repeated obfuscation, and I mean I've had this from Dean as well about. Like, let's just admit that there is a crisis at the fringe of Islam that needs to be addressed and that we need reforming voices. And they find that to be a condescending generalization, right? Which means that I feel like by having that conversation, I'm sort of driving them into the arms of our opponents. And I wonder what strategically then is the appropriate
that's what I call the narrative, and that's what everyone seems to be worried about, and that's what Hillary Clinton is worried about, and that's what President Obama has been worried about, the idea that if you really call a spade here, and you honestly talk about the unique problem with Islam at this moment in history, that there's a good reason we're not worried about the Amish and the Scientologists and the Mormons, and that we're worried about Islam, right? And here's the link between doctrine and violence that Muslims have a burden to overcome, and there's a burden of reform in this religion more than any other. If you're going to talk honestly about that, well, then the fear is you're doing ISIS's work for them. You're confirming their narrative, and you're going to drive some number of Muslims who would otherwise have been perfectly peaceful and productive members of your society. They're going to be orthodontists and engineers. You're going to drive them into the arms of the theocrats. They're going to start cutting the heads off of people in orange jumpsuits or supporting them.
But
right?
Sam, that's the straw man.
No, it's not a straw man. That's the fear is
well, that's not my fear.
No. The fear is that there'll be more support for jihadism and theocracy if you actually say, listen, guys, we have a problem with Islam.
Yeah, but you're caricaturing it by saying that an orthodontist is going to suddenly join ISIS.
It's not. No. Wait. Pull the brakes. There have been neurologists who have attempted suicide bombings. That's better than an orthodontist, right? In Scotland,
you've got your ranking of medical
in Scotland
hierarchy,
right? This is not. No.
I'm not saying that doesn't happen.
Ayman al-Zawahiri is a pediatric surgeon.
Right. You're not landing with what I'm saying. Okay. All I'm saying is that the concern is it doesn't even have to be as extreme as an orthodontist joining ISIS. Although I grant you that highly educated medical professionals do. The concern is a more subtle one of like if what ISIS really wants is to divide the world into its brand of true Islam and create just a sort of a vague and generalized sense that Muslims are persecuted and unaccepted as peace-loving people in Western societies, then it only needs to nudge the needle 1%. It doesn't need to be an orthodontist joining ISIS. It's just It's just that there's it contributes. I think this is part of the concern, and I'm a little agnostic about this on profiling, for example. You know, you're right in your brain in the jar sort of scenario that, you know, we should support profiling if on any given aeroplane we want to make sure that we are addressing the genuine risk. So obviously any given plane is going to be less likely to be taken down by hijackers if we make sure that the Muslims on board don't have box cutters. Like, that is true. But the counter-argument to that, which I think people don't make well enough, and I think you often find yourself with interlocutors who aren't honest enough to just say this, is, yes, that's true, but
the consequence of profiling will make people more insular and less cooperative and pissed off.
Yeah, just slightly plays into the hands of extremist Muslims who want moderate Muslims to feel like they're fair game by security services.
But let's make all that explicit. Let's make all, like, this is what ISIS wants, and now we're talking to the moderate Muslim community, and we say, listen, this is what ISIS wants. They want us to treat you badly enough so that you are more sympathetic with them, right? But the reality is, we've got a problem that only you, moderate Muslims, can solve, right? And we need your help, right? So I'm profiling. If the FBI goes to the mosque to talk to the community leaders, to talk to the imams, and talk to the congregation, just to reach out and say we need your help, that's profiling. Because unless he's going to also go to the Mormon Tabernacle Choir and have the same conversation, which he's not, right? We have finite resources. The only way not to profile is to suspect everyone equally or at random.
No, I'm in favor of that kind of profiling. Obviously, you don't put on security theater of going and interviewing the Mormons just so that you can not feel like you're. So given that no one advocates that, everyone is in favor of some form of profiling. So profiling is just this bad word, but we're talking about using statistically plausible, reliable information to assess a threat. So if you're a woman who's worried about getting raped, you're profiling men at a minimum, right? And you're more interested in 20-year-old men than 90-year-old men, right? So we're always profiling all the time, and we should, and we have to, and there's no way to avoid it, and it's just a big lie to say that we can totally avoid it. And really no one is advocating it when you get into the details. So we have to get the Muslim community to profile itself. We have to get, quote, moderate secular Muslims to decide that they're not going to put up with this extremism in their own community, and they have to find a theological place to stand where they don't think they're disavowing their faith, and they're not. That's like, no, this is Islam. In the 21st century, this is Islam, and it doesn't entail throwing homosexuals off of rooftops, right? Regardless of what it says in the Hadith, right? Because it says that in the Hadith. Okay, so you can't lie about what's in the Hadith. You just have to say at a certain point, I don't give a shit what's in the Hadith. It's actually wrong. Right? Now, unless Muslims are going to equip themselves with those intellectual and moral resources, we're screwed, right? Or they're screwed, right? It's just, I mean, because again, nobody is suffering this collision more than Muslims are. They're having a collision with themselves. There's a civil war within the Muslim world, and they're having a collision with the West, right? And there's a rise of the right in Europe, and if we have a President Trump, what's going to explain that? It's not Mexico, right? I mean, that's not the reason why we'd have a President Trump. It's a lot. It's the decline of the working white.
Yeah, it's part of the picture. But I would argue that the thing that is going to swing the balance for us, and I think it's probably unlikely at this point, but is just the complete failure of the left to grapple with this civilizational issue.
I'm with you. I mean, but it's precisely because I don't know how to grapple with it that I keep having these conversations. But that's a point that I routinely make, that we have just completely abrogated our intellectual responsibility to find a way to grope towards it. Because I'm not sure that your brand.
Well, I just wrote a speech for Hillary. Did you see that on my blog?
I did see that. It was great. Yeah,
so I mean, obviously she's never going to give it, but I wrote what I thought she could actually say that would be, one, honest, and two, completely steal the ground under Trump.
The perfect articulation of the right way forward. I mean, the problem is that when when you say all of the things that the Muslim community needs to do in order to have a reformation, Muslims react the way that we had the conversation tonight.
Okay,
right?
But the scary thing is they have
identity backlash.
They have the same reaction when Majid says it. That's how deep the problem is.
Right.
Majid has
black African Americans have the same problem when when Greg Larry or whoever the person
Larry Elder.
Yeah. No, but again, Majid is really impeccable in how he has the conversation. I mean, he's much better than me, and he's Muslim, and he's Pakistani, and he was in prison for 5 years in Egypt. I mean, he's perfect, right? Apart from a few indiscretions, the fact that he wound up in a strip club for his bachelor party.
I didn't know that. Huh?
Yeah. Apart from that, he is perfect, and he is just roundly demonized, and that is as a barometer of how far the conversation has yet to proceed. That's the one I'm most worried about.
Put on your prognosticator's hat, Sam. Are we going to be better or worse at having these conversations in 10 years?
Well, I got to think we'll be better. I mean, I think it's just like what happened with. I mean, the best sign for hope for me is what's happened with gay marriage. We're all sort of noticing it as a kind of a lost battle, and then all of a sudden it was won. Right? It's like Proposition 8 happened, and the Mormons won, and then all of a sudden it's the law of the land. Right? So things can happen very quickly, and I think this is a harder problem, but it's I got to think, short of the fall of civilization, I think we're moving in the right direction, however painfully.
Sam Harris, thanks for being on We the People Live. Joe, I love you, mate.
Love you too, buddy.
Thank you for allowing us to do this.
Great. It was a totally stress-free podcast.
Follow Was wonderful. People Live at WTP_live. You can follow me at Josh Seps. Where can people follow you? At SamHarris.org?
SamHarris.org.
And Joe Rogan.
And Josh Seps. We're going to do this again tomorrow.
Oh, my condolences.
I have a double whammy.
Don't get too sick of me, too.
Gad Saad, and then you.
You got Gad Saad here?
Yes. Okay, double whammy.
That'll be a lot of fun.
Maybe you could join.
You are a killer, man. I can't. You just get it done. It's amazing.
I know,
well, there's so many interesting conversations to be had. I can't say no. It's like there's no way I could get them all in. And at this point, there's definitely some sort of an obligation that I have to continue doing it. And, there's too many cool people to talk to.
To listeners who are